everybody. Welcome to Immortal Branding. This is season 2. I'm really excited to get this conversation going with my good friend Chad. This is actually the first time that I've got a chance to see him this year, and we've been friends for over a decade. And I want to introduce everybody to Chad Selvidge and introduce you to the Immortal Branding audience. These are entrepreneurs, creatives, and people trying to build businesses amidst all of the crazy crap that's gone on in the longest year ever. So how are you doing, Chad?
I am well. Longest year ever is about right. A lot of unexpected things this year. And it's good to see you. It's good to be part of your program. Thanks.
I appreciate that. Well, in a previous episode and last season of Immortal Branding, I talked about pricing as a strategy and how you can use it to effectively communicate what level of luxury or not or economy your brand is. You know, there are some products in the world that are so expensive, you have to be invited to buy them.
True.
There are some wealthy people who buy cars just to store them. That's not something that regular lay people can fathom half of the time. But price can be something that communicates this is for everybody, or it can be something that communicates this is only for a few. But today I want to talk with you specifically about pricing and whether or not people should increase their prices and what are the alternatives to price increase, because this pandemic has knocked everyone on their butts in 2020. It doesn't matter if you're in the United States or if you're elsewhere in the world, and you've got experience internationally, and you're constantly keeping your eyes on what people are doing around the world. But a lot of folks, a lot of business owners, whether they're in the service industry, product industry, or hospitality industry, are thinking they gotta raise their prices in order to get to the next level or make back revenues that were lost in 2020. Tell me your thinking on just pricing in general, and where do you think people should be as we go through this conversation on should I raise my prices trying to make back money that I've lost this year? Or are there other approaches that we need to get into as we have this conversation?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think there are. I think raising price is probably the last thing you should do. There may be circumstances where it makes sense to do that, right? You may be in it where you have more work than you can do, right? And if you got more work than you can do, then clearly demand is higher than supply. That's a classic place to raise prices in a good way.
That's a great reason to do that. Go ahead.
Well, if your competitors, if they're raising prices, that's a good thing as well. To be able to match that. Maybe you've tested this in a way, and you've tested higher prices and it had a positive experience with it. These are kind of places where I would think about doing that.
So let's back up for a second. You talked about demand and whether or not the demand is high. But are there audits that people should do first before they even consider raising their prices to meet the demand? Are there internal things that they should evaluate, like maybe cost of goods and how much is it costing to produce whatever it is that they do, whether it's a good or a service? Should they first do that internal audit to make sure they've calibrated all of their inside costs to where they should be?
I think you absolutely should. When you think about business in general, beyond lost revenue, we also have an increased cost of doing business, whether that's because we're putting up plexiglass around our cash wraps, or we're wearing masks or PPE. We're investing more in digital capabilities, our ability to reach new audiences. These kind of things drive your cost of doing business, and it's certainly worth evaluating. You also have to know your customer. Who's going to use this, and can they afford a price increase?
Or are you going to exclude your existing customers when you raise prices, and attract new And if the newer customers were already interested, they probably would have been buying from you at the lower price to begin with, because even rich people love saving money.
That's true. That's true. And you certainly have the problem with the replacement rate, right?
Right.
You've got a customer base that loves you and how you are and at the price you're at, and all of a sudden, if you move prices too high, you may get a new customer, but are you getting enough of them to replace who you're losing?
So I love that point. There are some things that everybody should be familiar with, at least domestically in the United States. And I take the U.S. Postal Service as a great example of a institution, a company that has raised price throughout my lifetime, throughout your lifetime. They have raised the price of a singular stamp. This bad Mama Jim, fortunately, this is a forever stamp. But they've raised the price of stamps. I remember when they used to be 10 cents. You probably remember when they were 2.
Well, not quite that old, but yeah, 10 cents is good.
But now they're like 55 cents to buy a stamp, but yet value in mail delivery, or more precisely, perceived value, didn't increase. So can you raise prices without actually delivering more value? Or will that ultimately hurt your brand if you just continue to jack up your prices, but you're delivering the same things you were delivering 5 days ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that unique product or premium service is that variable that defines that. I think there's an additional consideration, particularly in time during this economy and during COVID, right? If you're going to be seen to be raising prices, you need to be very transparent about the why. Okay. All right. Okay. The worst thing that could be perceived right now is to be a price gouger or taking advantage of the situation. You need to think about the long-term cycle, the long-term relationship with your customer, and how will that be impacted by this price increase? I mean, sometimes you just have to do it. We all get that. And if you're in that situation, you need to think about being transparent with the whys, right? My cost of operating has gone up, so to speak, for example.
Brilliant. One of the things you said as well, you talked about the plexiglass, and I've only eaten out probably twice during this COVID pandemic. I am super conservative about how I approach my health. But I do recognize, and what a lot of people probably don't appreciate, is for restaurants in particular, not only did they have to put up plexiglass, and not every restaurant did, but some restaurants did put up plexiglass to divide their square footage for their guests. They also have fewer tables that they can eat and serve. So the square footage, while the same, the actual productivity in that square footage can be 50% to 75% less. So they're not making as much money as they used to. But on the other side of that, they're also having higher expenses in disposable goods. If you serve somebody food on a plate with a fork, you can wash that and not have to buy a new plate and a fork for the next guest that comes in. But when everybody's doing takeout, you're spending a lot more money on just things that are never going to come back ever again. And some restaurants have not raised prices to cover that cost because they want to keep people coming in for takeout. And they're thinking about, I can get more customers in volume versus why penalize my existing customers with the new cost that I have. So how do you rationalize this notion of, I can make my revenue target by increasing the total number of people served or the total number of widgets sold versus trying to raise my price in order to cover the cost of the goods that I'm selling? How do you come to a balance between those, Chad?
I think it starts with knowing who that customer is, and can they afford to pay a little bit more for the meal, or can they not? And if they can't, then it's very clear, right? You need to stick with the customer you have. I also look at it from a point of view of, I am optimistic that this is a temporary situation and that things will start to return to some kind of normal. So in that circumstance, I'm thinking about how do we make it through?
Mhm.
And you talk about either getting more per unit
Mhm.
or getting more people through the door. And that kind of touches on a couple of things. When you look at some of the restaurants that have now done food to go, or now they have margaritas to go, these kind of additional kind of products of things that didn't exist before, they've been innovating and creating. And that allows you then to kind of increase your ticket. When you think particularly about restaurants, right, the concept of a price bundle
Mhm.
is I mean, they're right at home there. There's basically, you could get a meal for four, let's say, for $20 or
Right.
$30. But if you had to buy each individual item by itself, it winds up being,
$68. Yeah.
yeah. And so
So
I think
keep
about
going.
that.
Mhm.
I think about, what can you do to innovate? What can you do to offer different foods and services? Because it will take a little bit of time, and the goal is to survive until things come back to more of a normal place. But then you've got your customers with you, and that's when it can be much more positive, I believe.
So this is an interesting dynamic to think about: repackaging your existing products, creating new bundles, new product pull-throughs, or add-ons that complement things that you're not going to raise the price on. But this also gives you an opportunity to increase price, because if you introduce a new product, and not it wasn't necessarily something anybody was buying in the first place. So whatever price point you set is arbitrary. Nobody's going to know. There's no explanation needed, but it's a new product that you can bring into market to keep existing products at the same price. So the innovation, what does that exercise look like? That, let's take, for example, um, the music industry. It's kind of hard. And I bring up the music industry because I know you have a history in the music industry. In another episode, we'll have Chad tell you guys about when he met Jay-Z. You're going to look at Chad and you're going to say, Chad met Jay-Z. But yes, Chad
Right.
met
Hmm.
Jay-Z.
Hmm.
He's got some classic stories for you. But in the music industry, where price is not something that you can necessarily um, increase, because people are not buying albums for the most part anymore. They're
That's
buying
right.
phones
That's right.
and ringtones. And also they're not even buying music. They're subscribing to it. They don't actually own anything. So when you're in a subscription based service,
Hmm.
Netflix comes to mind. They just announced their prices are going up, I think, this month for their customers. But Netflix has at least announced they went with your why statement. They are producing a lot more original content than they've ever produced in the history of the firm. And they're also releasing new content more rapidly.
Yes.
So the product itself, the experience of the product, is fundamentally changing. So does that warrant a price increase, even though perception wise, you're still getting the same amount of streams on the same amount of televisions with the same amount of people watching, but getting more original content faster? Is that worthy of a price increase?
See, I believe it is. I believe it is. When uh, the great thing about original content is when it's done well, it's it's entertaining. It brings you something we talked about, value, right? Price and value are interlinked. And so if I can only get my favorite show on Netflix, am I willing to pay $1 or two more a month? Probably will be, absolutely, because of my commitment to the value that they bring in the unique kind of service or unique product
Mhm.
that is there, right? And by being transparent about rising costs, rising content, that makes an argument you can understand in terms of the expense of producing all this content that I've come to love. Okay, and a couple more dollars a month, I get it.
You make me think about the trade off that happens. Some people will pay a higher price for value, but they will stop doing business with somebody else in the trade. And we recently had a conversation just about grocery shopping, where you were talking about the experience that one grocery provider had more intuitive value for your experience, and you had loyalty to another brand.
That's
But
right. That's
because
right.
the value was greater at a brand that you weren't previously that loyal to, you shifted behavior. So
You're
go ahead, talk
you are
about that
absolutely,
experience.
Cam. That a great memory. You're absolutely right. I um, was more loyal to brand A.
Mhm.
But as part of the what we were going through in March and April when we couldn't get everything we needed, I started exploring Brand B.
Mhm.
And what I quickly found about Brand B was their shopping process was more aligned with how I bought.
Right.
An example being, I could place my order, and then what I would typically find is 3 or 4 or 5 hours later, oh, I forgot I need mustard. And this particular brand would allow me to go back in up into a certain time, modify my order, add things to it, and it just became seamless. And so my perception of value with brand B was higher. Even though the prices were similar, it was really then about the service of how I'm buying, my customer service experience
Right.
in online, it being seamless and with no irritants in the process.
I love this story because it highlights how important it echoes the conversation that price is also a strategy. But
Mhm.
unless your price includes some tangible perceived value, then you can't get people really to change behaviors. And in this particular case, you were shopping across a multitude of brands,
Mhm.
but because of the experience, the service, the intuition that they had, and understanding your customer journey was so spot on, it changed your behavior significant enough to move dollars from one brand to another
Absolutely.
brand, even though price was fundamentally flat.
Price was fundamentally flat. It was just the idea that they were more in line with how I shop, and the fact that I didn't have to figure out how I was going to $35 minimum to be able to hit the window of buy online, pick up in store kind of thing. Big difference for me.
So we're in a whole new space, and I want to spend some time to recap some of the things that we've talked about so far for people who are watching. First and foremost, if you're going to raise your prices, do an audit. Check where you are on the cost of your goods for what it takes for you to produce a service. It's kind of tricky when you think about intellectual property because your cost to produce oftentimes is only executed one time versus if you're making widgets that need resources and
Mhm.
supplies, you
Mhm.
have that consistent cost for each widget you produce. In photography in my business, I have the same cost of goods each time I produce a new photograph. I have work and labor that has to go into that. I don't get to recover or save costs from a previous instance. I have to produce new work and there's new costs associated with that. However, on the other side, if I produce a course or even this content that we're producing for this video, I don't have to produce this video twice. And
Right.
so I can keep my cost of goods relatively contained because for each unit of that, I'm not having necessarily to produce a higher number of or consistent higher cost of goods to do that. So I think it's super important for people to think about as you consider price and whether or not you should raise it, you also should consider what is the product that you're creating because intellectual property, IP, does not have the same cost of production over time that widgets or other products or other services will have.
True. True.
And
True.
and I think, but at the same time, IP doesn't hold value forever either.
That's
Um,
true.
so, people, if stuff stays on the shelf too long, price has to drop. It's got to get out of the inventory at some point. So that becomes a major focal point that people have to think about. So do an audit, make sure you know your cost of goods sold, but also check the market and see where the market is. Is it really that important, Chad, to match prices with competitors? If everybody is going in one direction, does that give you permission to just try to jump on the bandwagon? Or should that be an opportunity for you to think, is this the time for me to innovate? Is this the time for me to think differently versus raising prices because everybody else is raising prices?
Well, I think the answer is probably yes to both, right? One is, I think there are a number of things that you can do and think about in terms of your existing customer base and growing a new customer base in terms of how you think about pricing, promotions, bundles, discounts, this kind of thing. I also believe that if your competitors are raising prices, have to be the lowest? Do you have to match them? Not necessarily, right? As long as you are within the consideration set, and each kind of professional or business will have to figure out what that means for them, right? So will I go somewhere else because something cost me $1? Or will I or will I use a different photographer because they're going to charge me $40 more? I think it really depends on that consideration set. $40 may be too much, $20 may not. And so I'm not sure you always have to be the lowest, but I do think you have to be near enough where it doesn't matter.
There is one topic that, one thing I want to say before we close, and then a topic to kind of throw a loop in this whole pricing phenomenon. When the pandemic started in 2020, there was an article that came out, I can't remember if it was Inc. or Forbes, but it was talking about Warren Buffett said that during a recession, that's the worst time to do discounts or lower your prices. You either should keep prices, hold them flat, or you should actually raise your prices. But the last thing you want to do during a recession is start having, teaching and enculturating your client to think things cost less for you to produce. And once you get them at a lower price, they're never going to pay a higher price for the same goods again. So we had a conversation offline about discounts. If you are discounting too much, is it because your prices are too high? And the opposite of that is, can you stop discounting so that you can raise revenue?
Yeah, and that depends on where you are in the cycle, right? Some business where I've worked with depended too much on discount. And just by pulling, and it got to be confusing. Too many promotions, even for people to execute, our own people to execute, it was too much. And so if you pull back on that, effectively your net price goes up, and it's like getting a price increase. And that I think is very, very valid. So you have to assess where you are in that spectrum. On the other hand, pricing, promos, bundles, this kind of thing can be a great way to get a new customer to try your service or your product. One of the things that was very successful to us when we had a new product, a new beauty product, for example, would be little trial sizes that we could hand out or give away as a way of getting the consumer used to what that product is and giving it a trial. Once we got trial, and if we believed in it enough, we believed in the quality of the product, we usually got that second purchase.
Right.
I think that's important, right? One of the things that you talked about is, how do you bring value without necessarily raising price, or how do you keep your price without discounting it heavily? And I think that comes in adding value. And that seems cliche, but there's a couple think about that. I think about, for example, some of the supply chain issues that a lot of businesses faced earlier this year. And that was because of unexpected demand, right? All of a sudden we had 5 times the demand for certain products that we had before.
Right.
And so that's really hard for supply chain to keep up with. But once you get to a point where your business, where you can have clarity on your supply chain, then you can turn around and give that clarity or guarantees to your customer. If you think about a B2B, that's a value add. That because I know, I trust that you're telling me where this product is, when I can expect it, and then it shows up. That's worth something to me. That's not necessarily related to how much I'm paying for the cost of that good, because I make money when I sell things, and I can't sell things if I don't have them.
And in
So
a market of uncertainty, having something that's predictable in your supply line, having integrity in that supply line is value in and of itself.
right, absolutely, absolutely.
So
And
you talked about trials, which
yeah,
I don't know why you brought that up, because it is the last thing that I wanted to talk about. About 12, maybe 15 years ago, the world was introduced to freemium models, where people could get access to capabilities for free or perceived free. I hate the word free because it makes you think that there is no value being exchanged or transacted. Right. Nothing is free. So for those of you who are B school students, when they tell you there's no such thing as a free lunch, believe that shit.
That's right. That's right.
So
somebody's paying for something somewhere.
Somebody is paying for it. And so the freemium model was introduced. The most disruptive of these freemium models was introduced by Google, because Google created a model where the customer or the perceived customer got access to something for free and a second party paid for it, whether that be email with Gmail, whether that be Google Docs. They thought they were getting access to a free product to go online, but what they were actually doing is they were the product. They were the inventory, because the real customer that was paying for their use of that product were advertisers and publishers who wanted to get their content in front of them. So are there thoughts that we should have about freemium models? And the last example I'll think of outside of Google is Evernote. I don't even know if Evernote is still around. But I do know that Evernote's business model was that only 5% of their client base, their customer base, their user base actually needed to be paying customers. The other 95% could use the service for free, and only 5% of them actually needed to pay for it in order for the business model to work and be successful. So are there other business models that people should be thinking about when they think about price? Can I get a second party to pay for the first party's use of my product or service? Or can I build a business where I only need a small percentage of users to actually be paying clients, and build a larger client base at the same time?
Right, so you're talking about a market penetration tactic, right? Is part of your overall strategy to gain customers. You either go with a no price or a low price in order to generate those users who then hopefully convert to paying customers at some point, right? And that's a very valid strategy. And I think what we're seeing this year is you're seeing tech companies also going back to utilizing some kind of very tried and true brick and mortar type strategy. So if I think about some of these video services, right, that are out there giving you a 3-month trial period at a really, really low price, I think that makes a lot of sense tactically, right? Because you protect the overall price of your service at whatever that regular price is, that stays. But then you try to find, 1 million new users who would be attracted to that lower price and who would be less resistant to trial. And then hopefully that you'll prove enough value, you can keep a significant portion of those trial customers and lead in. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think when we also think about price, we should think about what are the other things in your arsenal? What are the other things you can do for your customer that you can add in terms of value? And this is definitely not a tech company. It is a very interesting thing, and I wanted to talk about this example. There's a plumbing company that we use, and they have a family plan. And essentially what that is we pay a monthly fee, and we get a set of benefits out of that. And the first is we get 4 inspections of our major businesses. Let me rephrase that. We get 4 inspections a year. And what I found interesting about that is they took kind of the 4 pillars of their business: heating business, AC, electrical, and plumbing, right? And so they do these inspections, and the value we got out of that, there's a number of values, but one, we get the certainty of that our home is functioning as it should, and hopefully we're catching any issues before they turn into really big repairs. The other thing that they did for us, or is part of this program, not for us, see how I feel like I'm special already, right? Is that they have this kind of front of line benefit as part of what you get when you sign up for this program.
So if something happens and you call, they come right away.
They come right away.
It's like a fast pass at Disney World.
That's exactly it. Fast pass at Disney World. They're on call more hours, so I don't have to pay an additional premium for late at night, that kind of thing. And so I really like how they did that, because that does a number of things. One, it keeps me locked into them, loyal. The things that they're putting on the table for me are low cost things for them that they do anyway. Right. And then I also liked how they positioned it and set it up, right? Rather than talk about an annual $120 fee, it's just $9.95 a month. And I think it was pretty brilliant in the way they positioned that, because it taps into the power of 9. And it's easier for me to think about $10 a month than it is $120 a year.
So I want you to come back and have a different conversation with our Immortal Branding audience on a topic that is getting increasingly more attention, and that is customer lifetime value, or LTV, and pricing, so that you can create loyalty, that you can now have predictability in your revenue stream by measuring the lifetime value of keeping that customer, and then actually understanding how much is it worth for you to get a customer, keep a customer, versus having to market and spend money to get another customer. That lifetime value is a whole nother ballgame.
Well, one of the things we talked about, right, is all the different ways. And one of the things, the alternatives, because I kind of started off saying, I don't, I think pricing should be your last. Well, when you think about how do you get more revenue, right? The first place you should start is with your existing customers, right? And that can mean a number of different things. One, you pour through your sales data and see what else they're buying. Right. And is there a bundle or promotion that you can put there? Is there a new product or service you have that you can reach out and market to? And then that kind of implies a couple of other things, right? One, is my social media optimized? Am I doing everything I can through those channels? Right. And am I collecting their emails so that I can communicate on a regular basis? I mean, there are a number of ways. Yeah, I mean, I think just, it's easy to forget or be unaware of some of these basics because we're busy running our businesses every day. We're busy taking care of what needs to happen and thinking about the future and thinking about COVID and taking care of our families. It's easy to forget some of the basics that would really help drive our revenue if we just kind of spent some time on them.
Chad, I knew you would be awesome to have this conversation with about pricing and whether or not people should raise it. I'm going to pause it right here and thank our audience for tuning in and listening. I can't tell you what the next episode is going to be. I could tell you, but you're gonna have to tune in because we're gonna have Chad come back in a future Immortal Branding episode to talk specifically with me about lifetime value. And there are a number of systems in place to help you measure that lifetime value. But Chad just alluded to the nurturing that you need to continually and persistently do through all of your communications and marketing channels to make sure that you're providing value over the lifetime versus just thinking you can keep somebody subscribed indefinitely. So thank you, Chad, for the time, for the insight.
It was a lot of fun.
And again, this pandemic has broken up our routine, but it is definitely great to see you again, my friend, on the screen. And tune in. There are links in the description below to get more information on all of the things that we've talked about and some helpful downloads for all of you all that are watching. I appreciate your time and thank you for watching, listening, and participating. And don't forget to subscribe, the bell, the notification, and all of that crap that you know you have to do when people are producing content. Just put a like on it, man. Peace.